Today's daf is daf Tet Zayin, and we begin 6 lines down from the top. Omar Rav Ado bar Avo, Ein mochrim lahem ashoshios shel barzel. So we said that there are various limitations that were instituted by Chazal prohibiting us from selling to idol worshippers. Amongst them are weapons. And these thick, heavy pieces of iron could be used to make weapons, and we can't sell them to my timer. Mishum de cholshu minayu kli zayin. That cholshu means they take these pieces of iron of barzel and they flatten them, and once they flatten them, they can make weapons from them. Maybe we should go a step further, and even certain farming utensils like mori, which is called a hoe, and chatzili is a different kind of a hoe. Anyway, they have very sharp points, and maybe we should not allow the Jewish people to sell these implements to the idol worship, because they'll know how to change the tzura, the shape of these utensils, and make them into weapons. Omer Avzvid, beparzela hindua. Even with regard to iron, it wasn't a blanket statement that you're not allowed to sell iron to a guy because he'll make it into a weapon. It was a certain specific iron that came from India, and that iron was very, very, very powerful, very strong. It was, and if it came in chunks, and they imported it from India, and in general, what they did was, this was such an expensive operation to import these Indian irons that they designated them exclusively for the making of weapons. But other implements which are used for daily usage and are not made into weapons, that you're allowed to sell. So the Gemara asks, why is it that today we're makil and we're lenient and we even sell Indian iron to the idol worshippers? Amar Rav Ashi, Lefarsoi de Magnu Ilovan. Interesting, especially in the light of the last war. The Persians were apparently at that point in history protecting the Jewish people against the enemies. They were probably protecting themselves, not just the Jews, but in any event, they would use these iron, imported Indian iron for making weapons that would be for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. So we don't see it as something which is dangerous to Klal Yisrael, that we're not allowed to supply weapons to the Goyim. I'm wondering out loud, I'm not pasking halacha l'maisa, but what would the poskim say today? There are a lot of Jews that are involved in creating weapons and selling them to various countries. Now, I don't know what the Israeli, law is. It's not laissez-faire. There are controls. You can't just, sell weapons to the enemies. But in any event, Agola Musyachim. So the Mishnah listed certain animals that according to Chachamim, you're not allowed to sell to the Goyim, the idol worshippers, but Rabbi Yehuda is Mekil. Now, on the list, you'll see different types of calves and foals, they're called. Fine. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Mata B'Shvura. Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to sell animals to a guy, an idol worship, in the case of an animal that's shvura. Shvura means that has a broken leg or some other part of the body that's maimed. And why is that so? Why is Rabbi Yehuda lenient? The premise of Rabbi Yehuda is that these animals can never be can never be healed, and they will eventually die. And as such, it's not included in the prohibition of selling the idol worshiper, because what we're worried about is that when other Jews see that you're selling these maimed animals, they don't realize that there's any distinction here, and this animal is okay to sell to an idol worshiper because it's made. They don't sensitive. They think, all right, you're allowed. This guy is selling animals, livestock to an idol worshiper. I'll do the same because there's no distinguishing mark here, and there'll be a problem of communication. However, Rabbi Yehuda's makil, because Rabbi Yehuda says that when you sell a maimed animal to a guy, no other Jew is going to know about it. I'll tell you why. Because the idol worshiper, when he purchases this maimed animal, he's going to immediately slaughter it. So that the key of keys here in determining whether or not we're going to prohibit certain cases because the other Jews will see that you're allowed and come to the conclusion that you're allowed to sell livestock to idol worshippers. The key of keys is how long the idol worshiper will hold on to that animal, such that during that period of shehiyah, of an extension of time, the Jews will realize, hey, this Yid sold animals to a guy, and I can do the same. Amrullah, the Chacham, however, rejected Rabbi Yehuda, and they said to him, Halo marbiim aleha v'yoledes. They're not going to take this maimed animal and immediately slaughter it. They're going to hold on to it. Why are they going to hold on to it long term? Because the animal, although it's maimed, can be used for purposes of mating in order to generate new, the next generation of animals. So they'll want to propagate the species, and they'll hang on to these maimed animals for such a long time. And again, there'll be a chash that other Jews will say, oh, you're allowed to sell livestock to the idol worshippers. Now, the Chachamim are of the opinion that Kevan de Marbian Olev Yoledes, Asu L'Shuye. They'll hold on to the animal. The goyim that bought this maimed animal will hold on to it for a long time. Amalehem, Rav Yehuda said, wait a minute, you've got a mistaken physiology. And that is, L'Sheteled. L'Sheteled is like a facetious comment with an exclamation mark. You come back to me and tell me that that this maimed animal can be mated and can reproduce. Alma lo makabli zachar. So Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that, let's say, for example, you have a female animal that's maimed, then it cannot receive a male and propagate. That's Rabbi Yehuda's shita. So he says here that due to the physical injury, the female cannot endure the pain of the male mounting on her. Ben Beseira Mata Besusi allows you to sell a horse to a idol worship. Tanya. And we learned in the Brisa Ben Beseira Mata Besus Mipnei. What was the reasoning behind Ben Beseira? As we said a few days ago, the horse is mounted by a rider, and it's not the horse is not designated for long-term plowing and working the land and so forth. So that's not the purpose of a horse. The horse is generally purchased for the purpose of mounting of a human being riding on the. Now, in the case of livestock, if you sell livestock to a guy, an idol worshiper, and he's going to work that cattle, for example, out in the fields, then the Jew might come to rent it or lend it to him, and then he's violating the Isur of Shvisas Behema. But in the case of Sus, there's no problem with Shvisas Behema, because even in the worst case scenario, if the idol worshiper who purchased the Sus is going to ride on the Sus, well, Hachai no seis atzmo. So therefore, there's no biblical violation of Shabbos. Rebbe Oser Mipnei Shnei Dvarim, but Rebbe says, okay, you may have solved the problem in the case of a horse of violating the Shabbos and Shvisas Behemto, but you have two other problems. Number one, Echad Mishum Torah's Kli Zayin, meaning a horse is used in the military. It's a very potent and important force that the Goyim could use if they want to mount start a war against the Jewish people or destroy the Jewish people. V'echad Mishum Torah's Behema Gasa. So Gemara says the following. What are these two reasonings? Number one, Mishum Bishlei Torah's Klei Zayin, that I understand, right? The Ika de Kotel Besuchfei. Wow, this is unbelievable. What they do is they train the horses that during battle, if somebody falls from the enemy, the horse will trample them to death. So that selling the horse to an idol worshiper will strengthen their ability to succeed in wars and in killing people, killing Jews probably. But what about the second explanation that Rebbe gave? Mishum Torres behema gaso. What's that all about? Mayu. And the answer is Amar Rabbi Yochanan, L'chiyazkin matchino b'rechayim v'Shabbos. What does a proud owner of a horse do when he buys a horse and he keeps the horse for a long time, raises the horse, and not only does he use it for riding, but also he will use it to grind at the millstone. And then we're back to square one, like other livestock. The guy is going to work the animal on Shabbos, so that even though a horse in its youth, might not be designated for anything but riding on top of it, which we said is not a biblical violation of Shabbos. But on the other hand, when the horse gets old, it's a 30-year-old horse, Mr. Ed, and now what they do is they use this horse to grind the millstone. And that's a violation of Meleches Tochen on Shabbos. And again, we're afraid that you might come to rent it, and therefore you'll violate Shvisus Behem. Tomer Rabbi Yochanan Alochik V'em B'Seira. We're going to be makil and passing like V'em B'Seira that you're allowed to sell horses to idol worshippers. Yibailahu Shar Shel Ptam Mahu, a fattened up ox. Now, the assumption is when the ox becomes so fat, then it's not fit for work, and therefore there won't be any chil Shabbos. So you could sell it to the buyer, and the idol worshipping buyer is going to shecht, he's going to slaughter it. Tiboiler Rabbi Yehuda, Tiboiler Rabbanan. Tiboiler Rabbi Yehuda will ask this question according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was making in the case of a maimed animal. Ad kan lo koshari. Rabbi Yehuda, when did he allow you to sell these very large livestock to the idol worshippers, El Bishvu, because it was maimed? And if it was maimed, the assumption is the buyer will shecht it immediately. It won't be in his possession long term. And the reason why he's going to shecht it is because Rabbi Yehuda's shita is that once it's maimed, he's not going to have any purpose for the animal, and we're not going to assume that it'll get better with time. It's not going to heal itself with time. It's got a permanent maim, and therefore he's going to shecht it. But here in the case of a fattened ox, guess what? The fattened ox can't do much malacha now, but if he goes on a strict diet, he'll be even stronger than a regular ox. If he keeps it around, he will put the ox on a strict diet, and he'll lose weight. I mean, maybe they'll give a surgical operation to remove his, I don't know what they'll do. And therefore, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it's awesome. And now the Gemara is going to offer the exact opposite, extreme opposite possibility, logical possibility, that maybe even the Rabbanan, who are more machmir than Rabbi Yehuda in the case of a maimed animal, because it's not going to be used for work, would be makil, would be lenient in the case of a fattened ox. Why? O Dilma afilu d'Rabbanan. Sorry. Benjamin, I'll call you right back after the shear. Sorry. Trying to shut off my phone now. Okay. Loka Asrei Hasam. Why are the Rabbanan Machmir in the case of a maimed animal? You're not allowed to sell to an idol worship. But the stoma lav l'shchita koi, because the assumption is that it's not going to be shechted because we're going to use it to propagate the species, and we're going to mount the male onto the female. Aval hai. In the case of a fattened ox, the stoma l'shchita koi. What's he going to do with this ox? It's a fat ox, got a lot of meat on its body, and just shecht it. Is afil Rabbanan Shari. You might think that even the Rabbanan Amatir, Tashma, we're going to prove that fattened animals are prohibited. Why? Because as we said before, we're going to put them on a diet. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel shall base Rebbe. Oh, Now, this is very interesting that in Beis Rebbe, they were somehow forcing the Jewish people. I'm not 100% sure it's the Jewish people, it might even be the non-Jewish people, but to honor their pagan holidays by selling the king and his entourage animals for sacrifice for the idols. So these people that were in Rebbe Yehuda Nossi's court would look for a way to circumvent this kind of attacks for the sake of AvodaZara, so that they don't have to in any way participate in, the celebration of the pagan holidays. So what do they do? Makrivim shoshel ptom biyom edom. What did they bring to the king as part of this payment, this tax and participation in the day of festive idol worship? They brought him a fat ox. Okay, chiser arba rivavon. They spent an awful lot of money, 40,000 coins, to try to bribe the king or the family of the king so that they don't have to participate and send their animals on the festive day of the idol worships. She'ein makrivin oso hayom. All they asked for by bribing the officers, 40,000 coins, is postpone the slaughter of this animal, this fat ox, for one day. Iser arba rivan. I guess a year later they tried again to bribe the officers, and this time what they were asking for, by giving them 40,000 coins of bribe money, she'em makrivin oso chai. Don't bring the fattened ox alive el shachut. In other words, shecht it before it gets sent to the king for purposes of sacrifice, and that they thought would obviate the use of this fattened ox as a sacrifice because it was already shechted. Again, on the third year, they paid a bribery money of Arbaim Rivon 40,000 coins. Sheima Krivin also call Ikar. Once it got to the point where they were successful in bribing them not to bring it on the day of the festival, but the next day, and then they were successful in bringing it after it was shachut, they finally had the guts to bribe them. Again, it was a step-by-step process, and finally to bribe them that they should not take this ox at all. Don't even tax us. My timer, what was the reason that they went through this whole process of bribing the officers of the king so that the shechita would take place immediately? L'chora, it's because they didn't want the idol worshippers representing the king to hold on to these fat oxes for too long of a time, because as we said, that will lead to a situation where another Jew who's watching this all will come to the conclusion you're allowed to sell livestock to the goyim. And you see that the Beis Rebbe was trying to avoid a situation where they would give these fattened livestock, fat oxes to the idol worshippers. And we just finished saying that that maybe the Rabbanan would agree that in this case it's mutter, because since it's a fat ox, then it's going to be immediately slaughtered. So there's no reason to suspect that the goyim, the idol worshippers who receive this fat ox, will hold on to it for a long period of time. So Gemara rejects it. And the Gemara says, so why did they, in the first stage, they try to bribe the officers and the king to hold on to the fat ox for another day? And what would they gain by that? Hello, says the Gemara, Rebbe me'ikar milsa boy. Rebbe's goal in this whole episode was to get to the point where the goyim would be mavata, they wouldn't even take the ox at all. The savar let's do it stage by stage. First we'll ask them to wait another day, and then we'll ask them if they would please shecht it before they brought it to the king, and then they asked them not to take it at all. All this was an arrangement to get to the point where they wouldn't take it at all. So Gemara says, "V'chi and let's say the pagans at this point would hold on to the fattened oxes and keep them alive. Is baria the avid malacha, right? And eventually, the Gemara says the animal that's fat will get stronger and stronger, and it'll be able to do work. Omer Avashi, Omer Lizvida, Bar Torah, Mashhinen Le, V'Ovid Al Chad Train. If you starve an animal, an ox that was fattened, until the point that it loses weight, this is a push for weight washes, then the animal becomes stronger and its malacha is even more effective than any other animal. And this brings us up to the Mishnah. Now, honestly, I'm going to need your help here because I can't understand this whole business about lions. I don't know. I guess if you run a circus, you can tame lions, baby. Okay. Ein mochelim dubim varayos. We don't sell to the idol worshippers bears and lions. V'chol davar sheish lo nezik l'ram, or anything that's dangerous for the public. Ein bonu imoim basiliki, which I think is a word that we use even today, basilicas, especially in Rome, or gardom, right? Gardom is apparently a kind of a structure that they put the basilica and they built it on top. And it's Tadia, which is a stadium, Obima, and platform. We'll see why we are not allowed to participate in any of these construction processes, because we're helping them to set up idol worship, and that's Lifnei Iver. Avol bonim imohem bimusayos ubeis merchetzos. You want to build bathhouses, base merchetzos, that's okay. But what's bimusayos? He says here in my translation that bimusayos are altars. Now, I can't figure out why you'd be allowed to assist a guy, an idol worshiper, in the construction of an altar. But he says here that there's something called tashmish de tashmish. Let's see if we could at least get a superficial understanding of what this is all about. There's an idol, and then there's bowing down to the idol, respecting the idol, giving it homage, and so forth and so on. Then there's the altar. The altar is called tashmish de tashmish. Why? Because the altar is serving the purpose of slaughtering the animal, and as a result of slaughtering the animal, it's considered a separate leg, so to speak, a separate section. Then you give honor to the idol. So it's tashmish to tashmish, and it means that the altar did not directly service the idol. Rather, it serviced the sacrifice, which in turn serviced the idol. This is like a conceptual lumda shadrei over here. However, the Ritva rejects this approach. He says it's illogical to say that we can assist pagans in building a place where the worship of idols is actually performed and they bring the sacrifices. Therefore, he has a different text, and he has dimusios. We have bimusios. He has dimusios, and it's another kind of a bath. Okay, it's not a bath that's where you pump in the hot water or water and then you heat up the water from below, but rather it's hot springs. Okay, fine. Next, higia lekipa shemamidim ba'avodas kol chavim also livnos. Even in these last cases where we're lenient, there's a point after which the construction is prohibited. That's when you reach the place where they put the dome right there in front of the idol. So although a Jew is permitted to assist in constructing the building that contains the dome, he is forbidden to assist in constructing the dome itself, since that dome directly serves the idol. Gemara says the following. Oh, Omar Rav Chanin, Bar Rav Chisda, V'Amar Le Rav Chanan, Bar Rava, Omar Rav. Now watch what happens over here. Rav Chanan Bar Rava is a student of Rav, and he's quoting his Rebbe, who is Machmir, and he's going to disagree with his Rebbe. It's like a very unusual kind of structure. Now, to understand a little bit about Pirkus, we would have to spend, I don't know how many weeks in Masechta Chulin in the laws of Shechita. But basically the problem with Shechita, and this is a challenge when you shecht an animal, is that you're not sure exactly at what point, at what second in time, the animal dies. Because when you begin the Shechita, that profound action of beginning the Shechita, Haschalas HaShechita, could possibly bring about the death of the animal, and the animal is called an Avela. So you have to guarantee that the animal stays alive until the end of the Shechita, and for that you need something called Pirkus. Pirkus, which means that the animal, jerks its body. Again, even though you and I might think otherwise, but the halacha assumes a premise that the jerking of the animal is proof positive that the animal is still alive. So you finish the shechita and the animal is still jerking. That's pirkus, and the shechita is a shechita ksher. However, there are many distinctions between what exactly constitutes pirkus. So like for smaller animals, let's start with the larger animal. The larger animals, it means that the leg of the animal just jerks out. But for smaller animals, that's not sufficient. It might mean that pirkus requires that it jerks out its leg and then it brings its leg back again, because the smaller animals are closer to death. Now, what's the status of a chaya gasa? Whoa, chaya gasa. Now, a chaya would be something like a deer, for example. So it's not a behemoth, it's a chaya. And these are non-domesticated animals. A behemoth, by definition, could be domesticated, but not a chaya. But he adds the word gasa. Gasa means that it's very large, as opposed to smaller chayos. So again, you have to know more about the laws of chayos. But anyway, for our purposes, we're talking now, and that's going to be the whole sugi about chaya gasa. Rav says that we're going to have to be machmir in the case of a chaya gasa, and we're going to require the same level of pirkus that we do for smaller animals, which are called behema daka. Behema daka are domesticated small animals, like, for example, a shepsela. He says in the case of a large domesticated animal like a cow or a bull, or a small domesticated animal like a sheep or a goat, there's a crucial distinction. In a small animal, it must extend its foreleg and then retract it, because a simple extension is merely a spasm that accompanies death. A large animal, on the other hand, need only extend the leg, and that motion suffices to prove that the animal is still alive. Rav teaches us that in the case of a chaya gasa, like, for example, a wild ox, the dying movement of a large chaya gasa is equal to that of a small domesticated animal. And in both cases, you need both an extension of the leg and that it brings its leg back in, retracts its leg, to use his language here. Okay. So again, as far as Pirkus is concerned, Rav assumes an analogy between the large chayagasa and the small domesticated animals like sheep. Aval, lola mechira, as far as selling the animal to a guy, and we're talking about again a chayagasa, as far as that is concerned, then Rav rules that a chayagasa is treated like a large domesticated animal, which means that it doesn't, the prohibition against selling a large domesticated animal doesn't depend upon minhag. It's absolute. And the same thing applies to a chayagasa. However, Ani Omer, says Rav Hanan bar Rava, I myself disagree. And Aflu Mechira, I say that the status of a chayagasa is equal to that of a small animal, domesticated animal, not only with regard to the jerking, which is l'chumra, but even with regard to selling to a guy, which is l'kula, which means makom shenogu limkor mochrim, shelo limkor ein mochrim. It all depends upon minute. But I'm going to validate, says Rav Hanan bar Rava, the minhag, the custom that allows selling these chayagasas to an idol worshiper. And the rest of the sugya is going to try to reject this approach of Rav Hanan bar Rav. Now, again, if we were going off on a tangent here, we'd have to discuss how Rav Hanan bar Rava could possibly disagree with his Rebbe Rav. That's a different discussion. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah. Now, initially, the Gemara tries to bring a proof in favor of Rav Hanan, because the Mishnah says, "Ein mochen lehem dubim v'arayos v'lo kol davar sheish bo hezek l'rabim taima." The reason why we're not allowed to sell these very large, non-domesticated chayos rows, of dubin and arayos to the goyim is why this bein hezek l'rabim, it's very dangerous. Less bein hezek l'rabim, if not for the fact if you could neutralize that element of the danger, then sure you'd be allowed to do it. So we see, like Rav Hanan, that you're allowed to sell a chayagasa, like these dubim and arayos, to a guy. Again, if assuming that that's the minhag, just like it was a small domesticated animal. I mean, the only difference is that it's a problem of danger. But if you isolate and liquidate the problem of danger over here, that'll be allowed. So we see a raya from the Mishnah to Rav Hanan against Rav Omer Rav Bar Ula Biari Shavur. Now, what does it mean by Biari Shavur? Under what circumstances, by diuk, we conclude that our Mishnah would allow you to sell this chaya gasa to an idol worship if the minhag allows it? It's based on a diuk that the entire prohibition in the Mishnah is because of the danger of the animal. Says the Gemara Nen. This animal is not dangerous. It's a maimed lion. Right? That's called shvura. And we're going to introduce now the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who is makil in the case of a maimed animal, because we don't believe they're going to hold on to it for a long time and they can't work with it and they can't mate it to bring back another generation. But Enochinami, if it was a healthy lion, then forget about the fact that it's dangerous, Hezek L'Rabim. It would be also to sell it because we accept Rav's view that there's an absolute prohibition of selling a Chaya Gasa to a guy because it has the same status as the small domesticated animals which were absolutely prohibited. There's no such thing as Midig L'Hakel.